so much for being here this morning. Tansi, my name is Zachary Pullen, Communications Director with Washington Conservation Action. Really appreciate you all joining us this morning. I know you're all very busy, so greatly appreciate that. We will record this too, and I'll make sure to send that out. I know some folks couldn't attend this morning. The EPC is really excited. The Environmental Priorities Coalition is really excited to share with you our 2025 legislative priorities for Washington's 2025 legislative session. I have a really great group of folks here to share about our priorities. We'll have my colleagues share a little bit of the lay of the land. We'll go through each of the priorities kind of briefly, and then I'll save some time at the end for questions to kind of get a little bit more into it. And obviously, information.
But during his time in office, he was considered.
As we move to the end, we'll take some questions from folks. So really thank you so much for being here. I'm going to turn it over to if you want to move a little bit forward for me, Ida. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Jerry. Here's the folks who we have here today. We have Cliff Traceman from Environmental Priorities Coalition, Darcy Nonemacher from both EPC and Washington Conservation Action, Heather Trim from Zero Waste Washington, Leah Missick from Climate Solutions, and Mindy Roberts from Washington Conservation Action. So I'm going to turn it over to Clifford to share more about the kind of context, the lay of the land for the 2025 legislative session, and then we'll transition it into the 4 priorities. So over to you.
Thank you, and thanks for everyone being here. I'll be very brief. I think most of you in the press who've been covering us know that we're made up of about 25 groups that organize around various priorities on a given year, and we like to lobby in Olympia on one common agenda and do so. Usually those are the issues that rise to the top, and we try to meet the legislature where they are, which is, I think, part of the reason why we've had continued success with this program. The lay of the land is pretty much completely different. We have a new governor, one that we as a community are very connected to and are very optimistic about this new administration's approach to toxics and recycling and climate reduction and preserving the Climate Commitment Act dollars for their intended purpose and not having those dollars siphoned away to deal with other budgetary constraints or challenges with the deficit. We feel like we're aligned well with both the leadership in the House and Senate. We have some new chairs on various committees, which maybe during Q&A, if you have questions about how that changes the lay of the land, we're happy to answer those. Mostly I'm here to take questions rather than reading off what the priorities are this year. I'll turn it back over to Zachary to talk about that. But coming off the win we had in preserving the Climate Commitment Act and the work we've accomplished over the last multiple years, passing major climate legislation and making more investments in Puget Sound and reducing toxins in the environment, we go into this session with a new leadership with huge enthusiasm and look forward to continuing our success with some of these new actors. I think I'll stop there, and if I missed anything, Zachary would tell me.
Thank you. No, you did great. Thank you so much, Clifford. And I will just say too, just to reiterate Clifford's point, is that we are really proud of the work of the Environmentalist Priority Coalition to pass some of the most exciting legislation here in the state. The coalition has really pushed forward some really meaningful legislation here in the state. We feel we're certainly national leaders in this work around the Clean Energy Transformation Act, the low carbon fuels, the Clean Fuel Standard, the Climate Commitment Act, so many great things. And so we're really excited to share this year's legislative priorities. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Leah from Climate Solutions, to kick us off with our first, not first in order, just first on today's list. They're all equal priorities, but I'll turn it over to you, Leah, to share about our first one.
Awesome. And thank you so much, Zachary. And thanks everybody for being here. Really appreciate you all coming. As mentioned, my name is Leah. I think I know a lot of you here, but I am the acting Washington Director for Climate Solutions, and we are a longtime member of the Environmental Priorities Coalition. And I'm here to talk about our first priority on today's list, which is protect advanced clean trucks and climate progress. So first of all, just to sort of set the groundwork here about what is the issue. Transportation is still our largest source of climate pollution. Probably a lot of you saw that the Department of Ecology just released a new greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And, transportation is still up there. It accounts for about 40% of our total climate pollution here in Washington State. And it's not just a climate pollutant that's coming from tailpipes, right? More than 20% of our total air pollution, so criteria pollution, also stems from the transportation sector. And, that causes problems for folks. That causes real health problems. There is a reason that we have overburdened communities in Washington State, and some of them are because they live near freight corridors. So it's really imperative, not just for the climate, not just meeting our greenhouse gas emissions targets, but for people today on the ground to cut tailpipe pollution. Now, in Washington, we are on the path to address it. In the past handful of years, we've passed a number of policies that will chip away at this problem. But just as we've been doing for other climate policies, we really need to be wary of attempts to delay or repeal this progress, which again would have very real impacts for people right now in terms of the pollution that they are unfortunately breathing in. So what is the solution? We are going to be working really hard to defend our progress by preventing delay of the advanced clean truck rule specifically. Now, Washington has adopted a number of policies that over time clean up tailpipe emissions, both from medium and heavy duty vehicles. So those are like vans, trucks, school buses, etc., as well as from light duty vehicles, passenger vehicles like you drive. So we have a policy framework that is over time reducing emissions, also saving households money by allowing them to transition to vehicles that cost way less to fuel, right? So we have a framework in place, but unfortunately there is a concerted nationwide attempt to repeal some of this progress. And so we are going to be standing very strong to prevent delay of the advanced clean truck rule. Again, this is imperative, not just for the climate, but for folks' health. We know that these larger trucks that emit diesel pollution have an outsized impact on air quality. So that's really important. We're not just sort of protecting what we have already worked on, though. We continue to chip away at this problem. And in part, this is about investing Climate Commitment Act revenue, continuing to invest it in deep pollution cuts, including a voucher program for zero pollution vehicles, including these large vehicles like school buses and heavy duty trucks, investing this in more electric vehicle charging, both for passenger vehicles and for these larger vehicles, and also helping folks who are living on lower incomes access these vehicles. The Washington Department of Ecology just had a program run that provided folks living on lower incomes with significant vouchers for passenger EVs. And it was super heartwarming to read some of these stories. One person shared that they now have a newer and safer car, and the monthly payment for that car is less than what they had been paying in gas previously. So they are in a safer vehicle that is much nicer for them, and it is cheaper. So continuing to double down on these programs, so defending our progress, but continuing to make these clean energy solutions that are better for people's health, better for people's pocketbooks, more accessible over time. So that's what this priority is about. But how are we going to do it, this strategy? Again, we have to have a defensive posture and an offensive posture, right? We need to make sure that there is no movement of bills that would delay our hard-won victories in Washington. And we need to daylight that there are industry efforts that are part of a coordinated nationwide attempt that's happening in other states too, and sort of daylight that and be sure that we stand strong behind our policy decisions that we have already made that are really going to help people and are really helping people right now. And again, investing, right? We need to defend, but we also need to pair this with Climate Commitment Act investments and additional policy to make sure that we're spending strategically to cut pollution and meet our climate targets. Now, we are on this pathway, folks resoundingly protected the Climate Commitment Act, and I think in part because Washingtonians believe in climate progress, they believe in cleaner air, and they also have seen these investments start to hit the ground and make a difference in their communities. Last biennium, the legislature funded the start of a lot of critical programs and helped grow others, and we are excited to continue that progress in this next biennial budget. So that is the summary of this priority. I think we're taking questions at the end, but really appreciate you all for being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Leah. Okay, next, we'll turn it over to Heather from Zero Waste Washington to share about the Recycling Reform Act. And for those who have been following along, I know there's a couple reporters on here. This was previously the RAP Act, and it is now the Recycling Reform Act. And Heather is going to tell us all about it and how this is the year for getting the damn thing passed. So I'll turn it over to you, Heather.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. Heather Trim with Zero Waste Washington, and I have this nasty cold that's going around, so I may have to stop for a second and do some coughing. So this bill is being sponsored by, again, by Rep. Liz Berry and Senator Liz Loveland, and we have a bill number in the House so far, 1150. Next slide. So as you all probably know from the past presentations we've done, people in Washington are extremely frustrated with all the excessive packaging they're getting and the plastic pollution they're seeing in our along our roads and in our environment. And right now, more than 50% of our consumer packaging and paper products are being either landfilled or incinerated, which accounts for about $104 million worth of materials that could be recycled. So that is an economic hit right there. Much of our pollution and microplastics, unfortunately, end up in our environment and pollute our air. And now more and more studies have come out, especially in this past year, about people's health. And we're seeing studies about microplastics and nanoplastics that are in your heart artery, testes, placenta, etc. So it's really come home about the impacts to humans. We didn't really have these studies until about this last year. Next slide. So we also have a survey that was done last year by Ecology that shows the incredibly high rates of popular support for this issue. And not only this survey, but other surveys that have been done across the country show how impactful people feel this issue is to their life, and that people feel like this is something they can personally do to help improve the environment. Next slide. So the Recycling Reform Act, which, as Zach mentioned, was previously called the RAP Act and the Re-RAP Act, will require the manufacturers, so that's the brands and companies that produce and just make the decisions on packaging and paper products, to fund our recycling system. Right now we have inconsistent recycling across the state. There are some areas that have no recycling and other areas that have quite a few materials that they can recycle. So it'll be a consistent list across the entire state that everyone will be recycling the same things. This is residential. And it will also fund, the manufacturers will fund education programs across the state for the local jurisdictions. So overall, this is going to reduce the amount of plastic pollution in our environment and coming into our homes, all that excess packaging, and it will basically help reform and revamp our recycling system in Washington.
Thank you so much, Heather. As we mentioned, we'll take some questions at the end. So I know we have some folks here who wanted to chat about the Recycling Reform Act. So we'll take questions at the end. And so Heather will be here for that. Next, we'll move to our third priority that we're talking about today, which is investing in climate action. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, Darcy from Washington Conservation Action.
All right. Thanks, Zachary. Hi, everybody. Again, Darcy Nonamaker with Government Affairs Director with Washington Conservation Action. This is no secret to you all. You've been covering this story for a bit now. The state, as we know, is facing up to a $12 billion funding shortfall on the operating side. So next slide, please. And on the transportation side is facing about a $10 billion shortfall. Both of these funding shortfalls impact potentially the Climate Commitment Act. And what we have seen historically when the state is in these sorts of funding crises or sort of, budget shortfalls is that environmental programs tend to be at the front of the line for cuts, even though there's not a lot of general fund in those programs anymore, or dedicated funding sources like the Climate Commitment Act get raided or tapped to fill these holes in the budget. And it's really important that now more than ever that we stand up and make it clear that climate change demands action and continued action, committed action, especially as we're looking at the incoming federal administration and a lot of uncertainty in the future. This is the time to be steady in our climate leadership. So next slide, please. So what that means with this priority, again, these are things that you know, but 62% of voters voted to defeat Initiative 2117 that would have repealed the Climate Commitment Act, indicating strong support among the public and among voters for this law, for the reasons why these dollars are used. That was a big focal point in the campaign of how investments actually make a difference in communities across the state. And we saw overwhelming support across the state for this law. And so we want to make sure that we tap into that energy and are having the public really be clear with legislators that the Climate Commitment Act and preserving it for its intended purpose, which is to reduce climate pollution and support frontline communities, that is very, very important, and that they will be scrutinized on their budget decisions. And the Climate Commitment Act, as you know, funds things like clean energy, energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is both in homes, but also in schools. A lot of HVAC system upgrades are being paid for with the Climate Commitment Act. And there are other funding items like conservation of older, structurally complex carbon sinks or sequestration on state forest lands. And that is really important when we think about the new Commissioner of Public Lands and DNR coming in, and that being a key priority for that agency as well. So we want to make sure that we are accomplishing a balanced portfolio of spending across the various accounts, including clean energy, including clean transportation, including natural climate solutions. One last point to note is that one of the areas that we will be looking at and spending a lot of time on is in the transportation side. There is a funding account that goes to fund transportation, clean transportation, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and that's something we want to make sure is utilized in any transportation funding proposal or plan to actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That's really important, as you heard from Leah, given that transportation is our largest sector of climate pollution. So we will have a full portfolio or package of funding items for the legislature. We are finalizing that package now and should have it next week. And we want to really, again, tap into the energy post Initiative 2117 that the public has in supporting this law, and really use that momentum in the legislature this year to make it clear that funding decisions related to the Climate Commitment Act are very, very important, and that law needs to be used for its intended purpose. That is the best thing we can do for the long term and for the near term. And then if there are any raids or sort of funding shifts or budget tricks, we're going to expose that. We're going to daylight that information for the public so that they know exactly how those dollars are being used. So more to come on that one. It's definitely more of a second half of the legislative session effort, but it's a really critical priority, and this is the year for us to really lean in on that.
Thank you so much, Darcy. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to another colleague of mine. All of them are. Her name is Mindy, and she's also from Washington Conservation Action, and really excited to share about our final priority, the sewage spill right to know.
Thank you, Zachary. Good morning, everyone. Mindy Roberts. I am the Puget Sound Program Director for Washington Conservation Action, working with a number of organizations on the sewage spill right to know bill. We do not yet have a bill number for this, but happy to get that on the website as soon as we do. Next slide. Some of you have been reporting on sewage spills that have happened over the past years, but it turns out that hundreds of sewage spills happen every year. So these are from a combination of combined sewer overflows, but also sanitary sewer overflows as well. And it turns out that few of these are widely reported to the general public. So that means that, unfortunately, you only find out after the fact. If you've been out at a local lakeshore or a river or a beach or a fishing area, a number of groups and people have found out only after the fact that they've been exposed to sewage pollution because the information is just not available to the public at this point. Sewage discharges obviously have a range of pollution constituents in them that cause a range of human health and environmental harms, including both toxics, but also bacterial pollution. So next slide. What we want to do with this priority is establish a public-facing website so the public can go to one place with maps, searchable sewage spill records so that they can make informed and timely decisions for personal pollution exposure. The reason this is important is I've worked on Puget Sound pollution issues now for 25 years, and I live in Tacoma. A few years ago, I was really surprised when somebody asked me, hey, what do you think about the sewage spill in the Theophos waterway? And I said, what sewage spill in the Theophos waterway? I consider myself a fairly informed person in this area, and I had no idea that these were happening. I had to opt into notices from my local health jurisdiction, but I only find them out after the fact. So this is a way to join other states, including South Carolina, Connecticut, and Texas, to put all of this information in one location, and the public can always go there to find out what's happening. Next slide. And the way we do that is reporting sewage spills is already a requirement of sewage treatment plants. That information needs to get to the Department of Ecology. And the strategy for this bill would be to require the Department of Ecology then to compile those spill reports in a timely way and make that information available to the public overall. So again, it's surprising that the sewage spills are happening across the state. Many of them are reported in the news, but not all of them. And not all of them reach waterways, but enough of them do that we think the public needs to know when they're happening and make their own informed decisions. So with that, Zachary, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Mindy. I'm looking forward to that one passing. Had a similar experience at Seward Park this summer. Didn't find out until I was swimming for a long time. So I just wanted to, before we do questions, I do want to share a couple of upcoming events. The Recycling Reform Act, they're having a press event on January 16th at 12 p.m. and that's at the Capitol. Is there any more information on that, Heather?
Yeah, Zachary, it's actually at 1 p.m. and it's going to be in the Ledge Building.
Thank you. I'd written it down wrong.
And that will be Liz Lovelet and Liz Berry will be the primary speakers, and then a few other speakers, including some doctors.
Awesome. And then the other one I wanted to share, particularly for reporters, is for storytelling or good opportunities to speak with folks who are really interested in this issue, especially in 2025. Who knows what is about to happen over the course of the next 13 days, 4 years. So we're doing Environmental Lobby Days in person on February 6th in Olympia. Happy to share more about that and connect with you offline if you want any more information. And so go ahead to the next slide. This is my contact information here with Environmental Priorities Coalition. With that, I want to take some questions. So if you want to raise your hand or just type your questions in the chat, I can read them out for you, but really do want to just kind of be available here to take any questions for our priority leaders. Okay, Jerry, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you. I have two questions. I guess they're probably related. First, do you folks, are you going to support use of the CCA money for culverts in transportation budget? There's talk of using some of the money for that. And secondly, I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on your concerns about the rating of the CCA funds for non-climate use in the operating budget. If you're aligned with House and Senate leaders and you're aligned with the governor, why today are you expressing so much concern about losing that money?
Can I maybe take a stab at those, Zachary?
Yep, please do.
On the first question, we have always resisted using Climate Commitment Act dollars as a main fund source for culverts. We do not support that. There is some CCA dollars that have gone to culvert funding, and we understand that, but the gas tax is the main revenue source for WashDOT, not CCA for that purpose. The whole goal of the CCA transportation funding was to reduce emissions and invest in those infrastructures and modalities that will reduce emissions, and culverts, the nexus is not as clear. So that's a hard no. We don't like CCA funding being a main funding source for culverts. And then just secondly, history, Jerry. If you look at the history of MATCA, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, it doesn't matter. Public Works Trust Fund, you name it, dedicated accounts often are under attack. CCA is a new dedicated account. The voters just affirm their commitment to it, but there's no downside in reminding the legislature that the nexus of the investment of those dollars is of paramount importance to not only the environmental community, but to voters and citizens as well. So it's a been there, done that in the past. And we just want to send a message across the legislature and the body politic that hands off the CCA for reducing the budget deficit. And finally, in answer to your question, we are aligned as we think we are aligned with House and Senate leadership on protecting CCA. Picking it as a priority was not because we had direct concerns about any messages from leadership. We have no direct concerns at this time.
Thank you, Cliff. Does that answer your question, Jerry?
Yes. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. I'll turn it over to Melissa.
Hi, regarding the Recycling Act, I was wondering if you think this kind of legislation will help with the issues we saw in a few counties where they couldn't recycle glass for a while. I know glass is not plastic and there's different things concerning there, but as far as funding the recycling system, could this help prevent those kind of incidents where there just isn't a way to recycle some items like we saw there, I think in Pearson, King counties temporarily?
Yeah, great question and good point. Yes, so if the Recycling Reform Act passes, then the manufacturers would pay for the full life, all the way to the end, including getting it to those end markets. And so there would be funding to make sure that in the case of glass, that it's getting to other things. So the challenge we had with glass is that the recycling furnaces, the recycling company in Seattle, which is called Ardo, closed this fall. And all of a sudden, people were left scrambling because they didn't have a place to send their glass. But there are other uses for glass. You can make it into insulation. You can use it, you can crush it and make it for roadbed. And those are now starting to come online. That would have been sort of smoothed out if we'd had the Recycling Reform Act in place, because they would basically have had to sort of ensure that the material has a place to go as an end market. And it is, right now, it's not even supposed to go to the landfill. So there was a lot of angst for the past few months, but it's starting to even out now.
Thank you, Melissa. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thanks.
Okay,
Awesome.
and it would be true for other materials as well.
Right.
Yeah, so like plastic is the big one.
Great. Okay. Next, I'll turn it over to Bill. You had a question.
Yeah, thanks. I actually have two questions. The first is on the Recycling Reform Act. Are there any differences with the bill this time around, or does it basically mirror what was there last session? And then as a kind of second part to that question, what makes you more optimistic this year that the bill has a shot of getting passed?
Sure. So yes, the bill has been slimmed down. The post-consumer recycle portion of the bill is no longer there. That was where you have material you must have a certain percentage of material when you make new products. So that was about 30 pages. So that got the bill down quite a bit. And the truth in labeling portion also came out. So Liz Lovett particularly wanted, I'm sorry, Liz Berry, sorry, this cold is killing me here. Liz Berry wanted a slimmer bill, and she also wanted a bill that more mirrored Minnesota. So there are 5 states that have passed a similar policy. Minnesota is the most recent one, and it's a bill that already had a lot of similarities to our draft bill, our bill from last year. For example, the definition of producer is exactly the same in the Minnesota bill. So this bill has now been restructured to use the same sort of framing and language from the Minnesota bill, and then stripping out those 2 sections. So it's now a shorter, more streamlined bill. Why are we more optimistic? Well, for starters, Rep. Berry has been working really hard over the interim, talking to her colleagues and talking to stakeholders. She's done a ton of stakeholdering, and there's been a lot of edits, small edits, technical edits here and there to address some of the remaining concerns by some of the parties. We do have the waste industry that is still in opposition, and they are not going to change. That's a given. But what is really different is the medical community is starting to particularly get interested and are passing endorsements of the bill. This is new for us this year because of all those studies showing the direct impacts on humans of plastics. That's all new, a whole ton of new studies that have come out the last year.
Other questions?
I can't seem to figure out how to raise my hand, so I apologize, but
Go ahead, Sam. Sorry.
it's okay. I was wondering on the sewage right to know, I may be misremembering this, but I was under the impression that ecology already required everybody to report when there are sewage overflows. These facilities already have to report that. So I'm wondering if this is as simple as pushing ecology to create a more streamlined dashboard for people to look at when those things are reported, or what is the actual mechanism that you're hoping for?
That's exactly it, Samantha. So all of the sewage treatment plants, as a condition of their permits, do need to report when spills occur. That information goes into the Department of Ecology, but it's not ever compiled in a way that's available to the general public. Back in 2016, I believe it is, before 2016, the Department of Ecology was required by EPA to compile an annual report of sewage spills, and that is no longer a requirement by EPA, and it just isn't compiled at this point. So that's exactly it, is a dashboard that the public can go to. Fortunately, we have some really good examples from places like South Carolina and Connecticut and Texas, and just looking at their dashboards and figuring out what's going to work in a simple way for the state of Washington.
Great. Bill, another question.
Yeah, so at the top of the call, it was mentioned, the optimism about working with the incoming Ferguson administration. We didn't hear Ferguson talk too much about the environment during the campaign. Could anybody on the call talk a little more about, any conversations that have been going on with his team about environmental issues that he hopes to prioritize or that you plan to work with him on?
Yeah, I can address that. So I'm the lobbyist for Washington Conservation Action. As you know, we're both a C3 and a C4, and we have a PAC endorsed very early on, did an early endorsement of candidate Attorney General Bob Ferguson for governor. We're very integrated in his campaign, and our president and CEO of Washington Conservation Action is leading his transition team on the climate issues. And so Alyssa Macy has been the co-chair along with Fawn Sharp in that effort. He has been strong on the campaign trail when it comes to investing in state force and carbon sequestration, in saving Puget Sound, and protecting the Climate Commitment Act. He is focusing on the issues we're focusing on as well, which is affordability and making sure implementation is done in a smooth way, and that we're learning from past regulatory processes to make the transition to a zero emissions economy is as smooth as possible. So I would say across the board, coming in, we're aligned. Now he needs to govern. And we hope to work with him as a partner and help him succeed in that way.
Great. Thank you so much, Clip. Any other questions from our folks joining us? You can raise your hand, come off mute, or put something in the chat.
Sure. If nobody else has anything, I have one more. On advanced clean trucks, can you talk a little bit about, I mean, my understanding with that is that that's linked to California's emissions rules. So is it possible, I mean, what exactly is like the legislative landscape there? Is it possible for the state to decouple just from that part of the California rules? I mean, you alluded to the kind of threats of delay there, but what exactly, could you talk a little more, I guess, just about what that could look like?
Yeah. So from a technical policy perspective, just and to give a little background also for others who might not know, all states have the option of either following the federal clean vehicle standards or California's clean vehicle standards. California had clean vehicle standards before the federal government did even, and since then they have been able to set their own standards as long as they are stronger. And then other states can choose which one. In Washington, for a very long time, we followed California's low emission vehicle standards, but then California began creating zero emission vehicle standards as well. And in 2020, the Washington State Legislature passed a bill, so it's now law, that says Washington follows California's zero emission vehicle standards as well, which are more protective of health as well as the climate. So right now we have a bill, so we are following California's rules. That includes advanced clean trucks, advanced clean cars, the low NOx rules around reducing diesel pollution from some of the most polluting vehicles on the road. We have to follow California's rules. Again, it's either follow California's or the federal government's. We can't like amend California's rules. So when you hear talk about delay, it is not a question of sort of like weakening California's rules. We can't do that, right? We just have to follow California's or follow the federal government. So a lot of times when folks talk about delay, I feel that it is oftentimes a misnomer for sort of punting and then divorcing ourselves. Now, the legislature could, of course, repeal the law that they passed just a few years ago or amend it, which I would be surprised if they were to do that. But of course, we are standing strong and really putting our position out there that these rules are incredibly important. They're important for folks' health today and on into the future. Hope that answers your question, Bill.
Yeah, that gives some sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, I meant to ask this earlier. Has the sewer spill bill been pre-filed and does it have a number now?
Melissa, this is Mindy. No, it has not been pre-filed. We're still working on the bill language right now and hope to get that in the next week or two, but I don't know that it'll be pre-filed for sure.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. All right, if there's any final questions, let me know. All right, well, I just want to say thank you all so much for joining us this morning. I will send out another email with the recording. And like I mentioned in the chat, next week, I'll send out the one-pagers, which is just a little bit more fleshed out information on each of the priorities. And I'll also send a reminder because next week is the Recycling Reform Act's press event at 1 p.m. In Olympia. And then the Environmental Lobby Days is February 6th in Olympia. So I am so grateful you could all be here this morning. I know it's a busy, busy time coming back from the holidays. I hope you all have a really great new year. And thank you so much for attending, and I'll talk to you very soon.
Thank you, everyone.